you can't survive without maths, basically. If you can't do the basic sums, if you don't understand fractions, if you don't understand ratios, if you can't add even just a little bit in your head, you're going to struggle to be a functioning adult and contribute in any meaningful way.
What is up, everybody? And hello from planet Earth. I'm your host, Philip. Most of you'll know me as Phil, and this is the Future Minds podcast. Simply the best podcast out there, covering all you need to know in edtech, online learning, the digital economy, and what's being done around the world to shape the minds of the future. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Giles Gillett. Giles is the founder and CEO of the New Leaders Foundation, a non-profit organization committed to driving real change in South African education. A former teacher himself, Giles has taken on the task of bridging the vital gap between data and decision-making in the education sector. Driven by his passion to make a difference, as well as his inner entrepreneurial spirit, Giles has built a truly unique organization that's driving real change. In this episode, we discuss why data is so important, the challenges posed by COVID, how he thinks about education in South Africa, and what the future may look like, and a range of other topics. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Giles, and I'm sure you will too. Without further ado, I bring you Giles Gillett. Giles, great to have you on. Thank you so much for making the time.
Absolute pleasure.
For any of those who don't know who you are, I think it would be lovely if you could just introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So, my name is Giles Gillett. I'm currently the CEO of a non-profit company called New Leaders Foundation. I'm the founder. I started it in 2009. And so the problem that we're solving is like working with the department systemically to improve learner outcomes. And we found that the best way of doing that is to focus on something that can be changed, because there are a lot of problems. And our key solution that we've been offering is working with data and helping the department figure out how they can collect the data so that the right insight is being given to the right district official, circuit manager, teacher, principal, so that they can make a better decision around what intervention a child needs, so that they can get better outcomes eventually. So it's a small piece of the puzzle, but it's around getting data into the hands of the right people at the right time to make better decisions. We've worked. That's kind of like the solution, and we've got a big national program working with the department, so they are our primary focus. And we've been doing this main project for about 8 years now.
And what was the inspiration originally?
So originally, I was a teacher originally, and I worked in Cape Town at two schools. I worked at Milnerton High School for 2 years, and I worked at Saks for 3.5. And then I went into management consulting, and did that for about 4 years. And while I was in the management consulting, and seeing how much money and resources and time, corporate South Africa and the private sector were piling into leadership development, change management, how to help leaders in their teams drive change for better outcomes. I was like, there must be a way that we can link my previous life with what I'm learning now. And so I started coaching a school principal in Alex, and saw that if you give people attention and you support them in what they're trying to do and help them with their thinking and their decision making, you can really, make a difference in driving change, like we were seeing in the private sector. So I then, looked to my friends and said, this is something I think I could do. I looked at doing it as a part-time gig with what I was doing in management consulting, and then I got very fortunate to be introduced to the Oppenheimer family, and they, over a period of time, listened to my story. I put quite a bit of meat on it, and we got some seed funding, and I started New Leaders Foundation. And in those early days, our work was really around helping township schools and districts that support those schools to come up with a plan. And then we would send coaches in to support those school principals and their school management teams and the district officials to drive better interventions into schools.
Yes.
So it's like essentially like, what's your action plan? We can help you implement it.
Yes.
But what we found, Phil, was that there wasn't any data,
Yes.
like accessible or aggregated data. So at a district level, like there was just nothing. It was very hard. Like they had some, but it was often, all kind of positioned around the matric results, which is a lag indicator, and we know that it's fraught with problems anywhere. So that's a little bit of the genesis. So then we realized data was an issue. You can't really drive change if you don't know what's going on and you don't have the right indicators or aggregated systems to help you see the bigger kind of landscape. And so that was what then drove us to then start exploring what could a data project look like.
That's incredible. I mean, if I think about the South African education system, there's sort of many areas of of improvement that one can point to, but one that isn't too obvious is data, as you mentioned. So looking at, I mean, if we just take a step back and we look at the macro picture, from an infrastructure standpoint, our public schools obviously have a problem. From an administration standpoint, the education department has certain hurdles to overcome. In terms of the data that you collect and the service that you provide, can you point to one or two data points that you feel may have been overlooked in the past that's now being used to drive action and make decisions, which previously was inaccessible?
Yeah, I mean, it's been part of our journey, Phil, to try and figure out like what are the insights that really drive action, because what we found is the difficulty is you've got a multitude of users. You've got your kind of efficiency users that like the system because it gives them cool reports that makes their life easier. So what took them like 2 weeks now takes them like 15 minutes or 15 seconds, depending on how fast they can press the button and print out the report. And then you've got your users that need it for more on a curriculum basis. And so there are different data points that are helpful for them. And that's the area that I think is more interesting. So, we try to figure out what those insightful data points are that are going to drive like a kind of an oh shit moment.
Yes.
That is going to be like, okay, so this is really bad. What do I do? Either let me speak to my friend or my colleague, or, but now suddenly I can sense that the schools I'm responsible for, whether I'm a curriculum official or a district official, I can now be driven to action.
Yes.
So one of the things that because we've got such a big data set, so we've helped them, like, I suppose the success of our program has been on the data collection side mostly, because you're working with the department to say, hey guys, we've now got to collect all this data, put it into a system, and then we can make interesting visualizations and come up with cool reports that can help drive change. But we had to get that data collection thing right first, because if you don't have the data, you can't do anything. So that's been a really interesting process, and I think a success story for the department to feel really proud about, because most of us feel like, geez, government gets it wrong more often than not. And what we found on the data collection side is that they can actually help them with some tech, help them with some innovation, help them with some clever tools, be catalytic on the side as a partner, and then support them to standardize that and make it systemic.
Yes.
And now we've got, before COVID, we had about 10,000 schools uploading their attendance data every week.
Sure.
Which is radical. I mean, like a zero base,
Yeah.
So the potential is there, and then it's from there. It's like, okay, well, what do we do with this data? So, like your question around like what are those data points? Like we've had some really amazing success around learners that drop out. We've had some interesting success stories around what we call a learner intervention planning report, which is because we've got such a big data set, you can put together algorithms. It's not, we've got data analysts and data scientists that are doing that work. And then saying, based on this big kind of data set in term 1 and term 2, we can predict kids that are going to potentially struggle.
Yes.
Or fail a subject.
And identify it early.
Yeah. So it's an early warning system that then says, okay, in this school, in this subject, these are the kids that are potentially going to fail. And, for any teacher or any subject advisor in a district, that's like gold.
Yes.
And that drives the kind of, oh shit moment. Okay, now I need to do something. And what could that be? And that's kind of where we are at the moment, is like, how far do you push into the solution space? Because it's not our skill. We've helped them kind of visualize the data, and we're thinking about, how do we make it more user friendly, so that you can have more insights. But they've still got to come up with a solution, which might not be easy to do,
And do you work directly with schools, or do you work sort of at a slight distance? So so are you in contact with every single school that's on your database, that you generate reports from, and then you generate feedback with, and what does that look like from an operational standpoint? Because you've got thousands of schools to coordinate.
So we've got Western Cape is the only one that's not on the dashboard. So the program is called the Data-Driven Districts Program, and it was kind of the genesis was to support districts to get aggregated data of all their schools, so that they could make better decisions and improve learner outcomes. That's kind of like what we've been trying to do. And we started in 2012, and we've now got, pre-COVID, we were getting all the province except for Western Cape, and I'll explain that in a minute, to give us their termly data and sometimes their weekly attendance data, through a very simple application where they upload their data, and then it gets visualized on a website that they can access, and it's theirs. So it's not ours. We've partnered with the department, and we've helped them with some of the tools. So we work at a provincial level mostly, and a district level, through a kind of train the trainer model, to support them on how to use the dashboard, how to use the data collection tool, because all schools have got a free software school administration system, kind of like a MIS for schools.
Yes.
And so we built this on top of that. So we used what they had. We didn't come in with a completely new solution. We said, you guys have got this. It's free. It's been given to you by the department. We'll put something on top to help you to access it. So the Western Cape don't use it.
Okay.
They've got their own school administration system.
Looking at the South African education system, whether it's public or private, from your perspective, or sort of your unique perspective, what do you think are some of the immediate steps that can be taken to mitigate some of the learning loss that's taken place over the last 12 months? If we look at the socioeconomically disadvantaged schooling districts, a lot of data from the World Bank, I believe, shows that these are the individuals, or these are the groups that are most affected by coronavirus, by the lockdowns measures taken over the last 12 months. Is there an immediate solution, or is this going to be a slow grind back to normal over the next couple of years?
Yeah, look, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I think it's a big hole, and I think people, the kind of time on task and kids having an opportunity to learn was always a challenge, even pre-COVID, and there was quite a lot of research done around comparing various levels of economics and how that impacted your child's ability to access learning. And so now it's just bigger, people that have had the devices, people whose parents have been able to, make a plan and do homeschooling. And now we sit with a trimmed curriculum, and I think the department have done a pretty good job in thinking through policy around curriculum. but the implementation, I think, will be difficult because a lot of the government schools are still only at half time right now. Schools that have been able to, get prefab classrooms have been able to mitigate that. But I think it's going to be tough, And COVID's still with us, so there is a kind of underlying fear factor because we've got a fairly old teacher group, and they're nervous that they're going to get sick, which I can understand. And they've had colleagues pass on, and the second wave has been a lot more intense for everyone, and I think obviously that's an impact for them. So my feeling around these solutions, Phil, is that collaboration and partnership is the only way. Like we can't, I mean, and I've looked at some of your stuff. Like no kind of piece of tech is going to revolutionize our education system. Like it's got to be done in partnership with many role players, and I think this is a perfect example. And we struggle to do that. It's not an easy thing to do.
That's a really good point. And, I think those sort of public-private partnerships, have the potential to make real change. If you look at some of the mobile carriers, being able to potentially provide dataless education applications, working in partnership with some of the hardware providers to gain access to large volumes of tablets or laptops or things of that nature. Unfortunately, I think the biggest problem in that regard still lies in the socioeconomic legacy issues that we have in the country, because although you could potentially fill a school with laptops, the problem is how secure they are. How long do they stay there? And unfortunately, that's a problem that we face in this country. Now, shifting gears a little, do you have kids?
I do. So 2 boys, grades 2 and 3. So I'm both in a government school, and so I'm seeing it unfold, in my own life.
As a parent who has some insight into what goes on, a deeper level of insight than almost anybody into what really goes on in the education space. How have you navigated the last 12 months? This has been an unprecedented time, and I think disproportionately parents have been affected, especially those that are working, running their businesses or working full-time positions.
Yeah. No, I mean, maybe the conversation with me and my wife would be probably a little bit different, but the one thing we'd both say is that it's been hard, it's been super hard, and that we both work, and, feeling like you're not doing anything well was common. That was kind of like the average day. So, I think we've been lucky. We've been able to get, we've got resources, so we've been able to get tutors to help with reading, getting the work done. And I think, our kids at a government school, but the school did the best they could with work packs and that kind of thing. But the smaller kids can't self-manage, you can't just pop them in front of a kind of a screen and say, like, here's your, here are the 3 YouTube clips that you need to watch, and here's the worksheet you need to do, and I'll see you in 2 hours. They're like, cool, you'll come back, they're playing Minecraft. You know what I mean? They're like, it's been amazing.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, it's a crazy time, and I think everybody's tried to handle it in the best way possible, in the best way that they personally could. And there is no sort of single prescription for how to handle such an unprecedented global event. But,
I think your points around equality, Phil, is the thing. Like, if you've got resources, you can create alternatives. If you don't, like, what do you do? It's super hard.
That is difficult, and I hope that one thing that I think happened in the last 12 months, I mean, many things happened, but sort of a positive outcome has been the fact that I think a lot of people have reflected on the lives that they lived pre-COVID, and sort of reflected on what it means to be a family, and what's important and what's not important. And sure, we sort of gradually move back to normal and sort of forget about those things, but to a large degree, I think that there's a lot of positives that have come out of this crazy time, and I just hope that schools, who have been disproportionately affected by the coronavirus, similar to obviously the healthcare department, just get back to normal as soon as possible, for the sake of the kids. You don't want to have that sort of lost generation that had 2 or 3 years of their sort of formative, critical, foundational years just missing.
And I mean, we're struggling with that anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I'm hoping, and I'm not very close to the kind of trimmed curriculum and where the focus is at all. But I think that they've made some good policy changes around that, and that might be something that has a really strong knock-on effect, because it's like saying, what are the important things in our curriculum? In a primary school, like, do we need to focus on everything? Whereas this trim curriculum is like, let's just focus on these things.
Yes.
And that could be a great outcome for us, where it's like, moving in the right direction regardless of whether we've got coronavirus or not.
That's true. That would actually be super interesting. Yeah. No, it would be. So your education background, or at least your professional background as an educator, reflecting on that, what can you tell us about sort of the importance of maths, right? Given the fact that we're a maths company, you're deep in the data space. I mean, the data and maths are interconnected. Why is maths important, throughout those formative years and beyond, for kids?
So, I mean, I think my answer is going to be pretty stock standard, but it's, I just think about my own life, and you can't survive without maths, basically. If you can't do the basic sums, if you don't understand fractions, if you don't understand ratios, if you can't add even just a little bit in your head, you're going to struggle to be a functioning adult and contribute in any meaningful way to any job. So for me, it's like it's a basic requirement. But I think more and more when I think about my own kids and I see them, navigating like the foundation phase, and I kind of think about how do I help these kids become, how to help them with their careers, and in a world that's changing so fast, and innovation, engineering, problem solving, all those things are, creative thinking or critical thinking and being creative are so important. And I think maths as a cognitive discipline, like, does a whole lot of things that you could probably tell me the detail around, but like neurologically does so much in your growth as a child that you need it for all those things. It's connecting dots that are critical for you to be able to do things that are going to make you successful in life. So I mean, that would be my
maths is the foundation of logic and critical thinking, as you just said, and especially sort of the data overload in the world that we live in right now. You have to be able to think critically. You have to be able to sort of separate the relevant from the irrelevant information. And, I guess in the end of the day, we got to ask ourselves, like, what does it mean to have a successful education, or how do you define a successful education? And I guess for everybody that's different, but, coming back to what you just said about integrating into a society where, you're a fully functioning adult that can contribute, that can communicate, that can think critically. That's what we hope for the next generation.
And I mean, I think there's so many problems to solve, especially in this country. And, at the moment there's this narrative of like, I want to go and see what else is out there in the big wide world. And that's cool for any young person to be ambitious and wanting that. But, I think there's so many interesting things here. Like the problems here, it's the land of milk and honey of problem solving, and I think one of my big takeaways from having built New Leaders Foundation has been the quality of the people that we've attracted into our business. And it's a non-profit company, sure, so it has like a strong purpose element to it, and we're working in education, but like young South Africans, highly qualified. We've got like actuaries there. We've got people with masters in economics. There are many things they could do, but they're choosing to come and solve like this problem of education and contribute to that. And that, whether they fall into the millennial group, and there's all this talk about, well, millennials are looking for purpose, and I get it. I mean, I'm seeing it, and that gets me excited.
Yeah.
because they're learning to contribute, and they're solving a great problem.
Yes. That's truly inspiring. I think it's great seeing millennials wanting to opt for a sort of more purpose-driven career than simply chasing the career. But speaking about sometimes in a country like ours, you don't always have that option, and I guess that comes down to the unemployment problem that we have. And there's obviously a deep link between education and unemployment. So how do you see unemployment play out over the next couple of years in SA, and what are some of the key things we can do, to combat the unemployment problem that we have in SA?
Yeah, no, because it's like it's a double whammy, because we've got to try and fix education, and that's going to take generations. It's not going to, I think that's for me, it's initially I was like, no, we can do this 10 years, we can make it happen. But I'm like 12 years in and not much has changed, and so it's deflating. But at the same time, we've got to look after the kids that have had a poor education, and how do we set them up economically and create opportunities. And Phil, I think it's a holy grail. I mean, I look at organizations like Harambee that have emerged in the last 10 years. The Yes campaign, First Rand have got a program around youth employment, and so those guys are leading the way, I think, in linking, private sector money and opportunities around the supply side, and then your demand side is, the other way around the demand, and then the supply is what's coming from the system, So,
Yes.
That's on the kind of the now, they're solving the now problem. They're like, how do, there's a company that needs X skill. Can we match that with what exists? And how do we help young people enter into that supply and demand conversation so that you can maximize it?
Yes.
I think those kind of organizations have done amazing work. I mean, Harambee, if you haven't got them on your show, you should think about
I'll
them.
definitely reach out. Yeah.
Great story. But I think, it's challenging, man. I don't like the obvious thing is vocational training.
Sure.
I think, which is a curriculum shift, and the ministers has been driving a 3-stream approach for a while and talking about it, but it's going to take years to see that come to fruition. I'm not, the speed around it isn't fast enough.
Yeah.
But I've been, you hear stories about a country like Austria, like 70% of their population is vocationally trained. 70%.
Yes.
That's
incredible.
like a first world country, and like here we are, like grinding away at trying to get our kids through an academic route, and they can't even get work necessarily. I mean, obviously, like 10% or whoever gets through to that final space, should get a job, but it's not guaranteed. So I think there's a big mind shift change in our decision makers at the top to say, like, let's create more electricians, more coders, more.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because it's a complete paradigm shift that needs to take place. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the large majority of students don't respond well to the traditional academic environment, where it's input and output, and you expected to, perform on paper, and then you leave university or you leave high school with no real world skills, and you've got to almost start from scratch. So I fully endorse that. I think that vocational sort of trade type option should be there for students, and I hope that gets implemented sooner than later.
Yeah. No, I mean, it would, significantly change things.
Yeah. So where do you think education, or what do you think education looks like in the traditional sense 10 years from now? Are we still sitting in classrooms, or have we migrated to more of a hybrid sort of blended learning approach, where kids are spending most of their time at home?
I think I can't see it happening here. I think here the next 10 years, it's the same, chalk and talk. I'm talking about the base, like
yes.
I think your private schools will lead. They'll be following, innovation that's happening in Finland and, wherever the real kind of cutting edge education is happening, and doing their best to keep up with that. And the good government schools will do the same, or the more well-resourced, not necessarily good, the more well-resourced. So, but I can't see that kind of big change happening at scale here. I think there's just too many constraints. But what does education look like for the resourced? Geez, man, it's this has got to be the biggest, craziest time. When I look at the access to any learning online, it's just it's just amazing. And will universities even exist for our kids? I don't know, but I think they will, but in a different way.
Yes. Yes.
I think homeschooling is going to ramp up. I think it already has. I don't know the stats on that. Yeah. I'm sure it has ramped up significantly.
Yeah, I mean, South Africa ranks, I believe on Google Trends, South Africa ranks second in the world for the search term homeschooling. Yeah. So just, which is, I mean, it's interesting, and it's obviously a problem that needs to be tackled. We don't have the homeschooling resources that first world countries have at their disposal, and I think that homeschooling demand is part, shifting away from the norm and sort of having that paradigm shift as a parent. But I think even more so, it's out of desperation. I think for the parents, I think for the parents and for the child, I think it applies to both. For the child, it applies in the sense that, some children just aren't emotionally or psychologically suited to be in this traditional 25-person stacked classroom, and they need to find alternatives. And I also think for some parents, it may simply be that, they are looking for something better, but they can't afford what they're looking for, and they're trying to find alternatives online. And the problem in the SA, well, it's not a problem, I guess, but it is something to take note of. Part of the reason why many of the public schools had to go back at a point last year, potentially prematurely, during the lockdown, was again coming back to the socioeconomic problems, because kids get fed at school. A lot of families rely on schools to feed them.
I mean, it was amazing to see how the kind of civil society rallied. I mean, I wasn't involved directly, but how many NGOs kind of shifted their operations to just manage that challenge. It was impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there still was a big gap, but there was some amazing work done.
Let's maybe we should shift away from the morbid. Look, it's not morbid. It's not a completely dire situation. Fortunately, there are organizations, like you said, that are really making a difference. Like your organization. For somebody like yourself to commit yourself to this this sort of non-profit business, obviously there's a lot of passion involved. Obviously there's a lot of purpose involved. What is that key driver for you personally? If you had to look at yourself and what's that personal philosophy that drives you?
So I think for me it's always been around purpose and doing something that I feel like is making a difference. And I love being a teacher. Like it was the easiest thing to do every day. Like I woke up, I never, I loved it. I always woke up with energy and excitement. And it was one of the hardest jobs I've ever had, without a doubt. But I think inherently I'm more of an entrepreneur and wanted to see what else I could do. And so I think I've been driven by both the purpose and the opportunity to create and lead and kind of influence and build something that's supporting something bigger. So I've been driven by both the kind of activist kind of purpose piece, but then within that, it's just been like such an amazing journey around working with just such a wide range of stakeholders, both in private sector and in government, around solving a problem and being creative. And I feel like I've just been on this winding kind of river of solutioning. And even when we got onto the DDD program, where it was like, okay, this is where we're going to go, that's continued. And then it was about building a business, and how do you work with a staff of like 45 people, or how do you even get there, and that's been fascinating. So that was completely unintended. Like I didn't sort of feel like I would have ever been an entrepreneur. Kind of just happened.
Yes.
Which I've really enjoyed.
So what is the DDD program?
So the DDD program is this program that I was talking about. It's the data-driven district. We've helped the department get the data in. We visualized it for them on a dashboard, and they use that.
Yes.
And the challenge is that we don't have the kind of usage on the dashboard that we should have. So we're the only product at the party, and we still don't have the kind of usage that we should have. So it's like, at what point did people start using internet banking? It kind of would have done this for a long time, and then suddenly it would have done this, and we just haven't seen that.
Yes.
And so at the moment we're really racking our brains to think about. Some of it's about us, and some of it's about the user, but it's around how do we package this thing differently and be really, really user-centric.
Yes.
So it's like an interesting thing about innovation, tech, and problem solving ours is in the context of education, that can really unlock change, solutions and drive change.
Yes.
So that's what's been really fascinating, and working with such a big system, where you can be catalytic. And I said it earlier. I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud about, is that we've worked with government to help them succeed.
Yes.
In something that they didn't have before, and now they're the ones that have done it. We've helped them get there. Certainly not our success. We've been just part of it, but it's you were looking for a good news story, and I think that for me is it. It's like this. If private sector can be innovative and patient and walk the journey, like if you can get the right kind of funder, and we haven't spoken about the funders, and that's an interesting story as well, is that you need a funder that's entrepreneurial, but in it for the long haul, because systemic change takes time.
Yes.
And I think we want like a quick fix. Funders are often just like, if it isn't working, there's no ROI, I'm out of here. And in this case, we've had a funder that's really stuck in it, and then you'll see change happening.
Yeah.
But then it's kind of shared value, and it's not just about someone being the hero and coming up with the clever tech that then changes the landscape.
Yeah.
So it's been very interesting to see the department do well.
That's super interesting. So why? So maybe not why, but your name's the New Leaders organization. You've obviously got experience as an educator, but then also as a coach, as a leader, as a mentor. What in your mind can parents do to instill those characteristics of a leader in their kids? I guess everybody wants their kids to be leaders one day, whichever industry they end up going into. What makes for a good leader? Is it genetic, or is it something that you can train and you can build?
Yeah, I think everyone's a leader. I think some people are just more, obviously more naturally drawn to it. It's in their DNA more directly. But I think we all lead. We have to lead our own lives. We've got to figure stuff out. And having been a teacher and worked with young people over time, they've all got the potential to lead. And in fact, they have to lead, otherwise they're not going to be successful. But the ones that kind of pop out as your kind of these amazing leaders, I think like that, there are probably some genetics there. It's like nature nurture discussion, and are they born or are they made? And that's why there's so many leadership books out there, because it's so difficult to define and understand. But I think everyone's got that potential in them. And funny enough, I created the name New Leaders because I was wanting to see a different kind of leadership in our system.
Yes.
And the data came later. That was kind of like, as I said, in the river of problem solving. It was like, oh, okay, geez, the guys can't lead because there's no data. Okay, let's fix that.
Yes.
And then I can be a better leader because I've got data.
Yes.
It's like trying to run a business without management accounts. It's like, well,
fantastic. Well, look, that brings us close to the end. So what we like to do is to ask guests a couple of questions, just quick. First one is, what books would you recommend everybody read? Or just one or two books that come to the top of your mind?
So it's kind of left field, but there's a book by a guy called Herman Hesse called Siddhartha that I read.
Okay.
When I was in my 20s, and it's a kind of, it's a fable around life, I suppose, based on story of Buddha essentially, but its lessons are widely applicable. So like that, if I'd say like that's kind of a book that's really like influenced me. And other books, I think there's so much literature out there. I'm at the moment, I love biographies. I've read some really interesting ones, and I'm drawn to understanding leadership and people that have failed and succeeded. And I've read biographies from like the Mandela one to Bruce Springsteen to Mbeki to many others. I really enjoyed those.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I heard Andre Agassi's biography is apparently brilliant.
Yes, I've read that.
And then what do you believe about the education system, or about education in general, that you think would be an unpopular opinion amongst most?
Well, I would go, like, I think the idea that we're going to be able to fix South African education, I think is unlikely. And that's hard for us to hear, like, is it going to ever get fixed? Ever? Like, deep down, I hope that it will, but I've seen enough now to go, well, like, I think it can for a lot, but it's not going to be fixed for everyone. And I think it's just our history has put us in a very difficult position. And I would say that's probably the cynical side of me is that it's going to take years, and I can do what I can do.
Yeah.
I can't see it being fixed, certainly not in my lifetime.
Well, to end off, where can people find you? Whether it's funders or institutions interested in connecting and collaborating, how can they find you and get in touch?
Sure. I mean, our website is newleaders.co.za. And then the DDD project website is dbe-dashboard.co.za.
Well, Giles, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and it was a very interesting conversation. Definitely something different, and I think you're tackling a problem that's mostly overlooked, but critical.
Yeah, it's like, I think the systemic space is just, it's hard, and I think that your choice as a leader in the NGO space is like, or in any kind of social entrepreneurial spaces, what can you fix?
Yes.
You're going in to fix the 6 schools that need help, and that's an amazing effort, because you're going to fix that community, and whereas the systemic changes is much more around like the long road with governments partnering. And I think that's where I would say, like, our success story, one of our big success factors has been the ability to partner, because you can't do this thing on your own. And I think as a civil society, you've got to just get stuck in and walk the journey with government and the amazing people in government. That's the other thing that I've learned. It's enormously talented people that are like both incredibly skilled and super purposely passionate. So your pockets.
Well, that's brilliant, and that's very that's inspiring to hear. So, no, good luck to you, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
The Future Minds podcast is brought to you by Smartec. Smartec is an award-winning, intelligent, online mathematics and coding program for kids aged 4 to 14. Powered by sophisticated, adaptive AI, SmartTech teaches kids math and coding from the comfort of home in as little as 15 minutes per day. For more information, visit smarttech.com or download the app on tablet or iPad today.